Alright everyone, link in the description to an interesting article that was actually from the Washington Examiner. Now, of course, I understand the Examiner is not exactly the most pro-socialism publication in the United States legacy media. And it is legacy media, even if it's slightly more fair than the Washington Post. The idea behind it is true, and this is something that I've spoken of, which is that if Bernie Sanders is nominated, he's not going to win against Trump. At this point, it's a long shot for his nomination anyway. Bernie Sanders has stubbornly swung around to and fro within the same polling range, the same as most candidates. If you look, there's a really stable long-term trend for most of these people. Biden, for instance, gravitates between the mid to upper 20s and the low 30s. He's very consistently within that range. There's really a 5-point spread where he's been for months and months. We're talking... for some of these candidates, you've had stable polling numbers now for more than half a year. The idea that it shifts, that it changes long term, would require a significant shift within politics. But the thing is, the debates aren't changing anything. There's no major swings after those at this point. The swings that you are seeing tend to be more limited now than like Kamala with the first debate, spiking and then falling out of existence and then dropping out weeks ago. What's happened is that you're gaining actually more stability, I think, within the field. I think Bernie Sanders has a low ceiling. Here's the problem. I pointed this out this morning. It doesn't even matter. Like, a lot of Bernie Sanders fans are mad at Biden for existing. Well, Sanders would be in the lead if it weren't for you, which I question. But here's the thing. No matter who the nominee is, basically, it's likely to be one of three people at this point. It's likely to be Biden, Warren, or Sanders. Those are the three that have the majority support. They're far ahead of everyone else. There's still potentially time for somebody to rise up, but it's not highly likely. No matter who gets the nod, though, at least a fifth and upwards of a third of Democrats will appear, this is by appearances, would think that the nominee was doomed anyway. Like, the general election begins, but on day one they're already expecting failure. Because it seems like most of Biden's fans look at Sanders and say he's not pragmatic, he's a socialist, he's nuts, he can't win. Sanders fans look at Biden and they say, well, he's incoherent, which I agree with, and he's too much of a neoliberal, he's not going to energize anyone, he can't win. By the way, I agree with both groups of people. I don't think either of them can win at this point. Nor do I think that Elizabeth Warren would be able to win. She'd probably be the weakest in the debate. She freezes like a deer in the headlights if she's antagonized. What's Trump known for? It'd be a blood sport. Here's what I would say. Bernie Sanders, though, is unqualified for the following reasons. And I've touched on these, but I figured, in the wake of this article, make a video for this. Yeah, this would be a little bit of a warning to the Dems about Bernie Sanders. Partially, I say this as a Vermonter who understands the finer points of his style of policies, at least in the light sense as they've been applied to Vermont. Not somewhere that the United States, by and large, would want to go economically, certainly. The first problem is his age. He'll be 80 years old during the general. That's too old to be a president of the United States. Yeah, my ageism. Okay, we were having a national conversation a few years ago about the fact that Trump was 70 and Hillary Clinton was almost 70, and they'd be the oldest president ever, and this is a problem, and people invoked second-term Reagan when he appeared to be demented. Bernie Sanders is considerably older than any of them. He would be starting out day one of his first year as president, if he were elected, older than Ronald Reagan was when he left office, having been prior the oldest president. This, I think, pushes the envelope of what we could possibly consider acceptable. The president has a very hectic job schedule, and he just got done having a heart attack a couple months ago. This does matter. It got almost completely eliminated from the news cycle within minutes. Oh yeah, Sanders had a heart attack, but don't worry about it, folks. He campaigns hard. He's really healthy. Trump, meanwhile, he takes an hour out of his schedule for an impromptu physical, and people suspect that he's dying. And this is the legacy media's propagandistic bullshit, but I mean, Bernie Sanders was treated with kid gloves over this, but he did have a major health crisis. He had a heart attack. That's a significant thing for someone pushing 80 years old. That's not usually good. It's usually, you don't recover very easily from such things. How is he going to have the energy to go up against Trump anyway when he's almost a decade older? That's number one. Number two, he's a socialist. The problem is that the term socialist, divorced of any ideological context, I know Bernie bros would say, well, he's not really socialist, he's really more of a social democrat. That's not the term he uses, perception over reality. Well, socialism's actually a good thing, like Scandinavians. Again, it doesn't matter if that's true in your mind, and I would debate you all day over this, and I would be glad to do so. So far, most Bernie fans are unwilling to debate. Like the Amazing Atheist loves the dude. He won't debate me on the subject, probably for pragmatic reasons. Bernie Sanders uses the term socialism to describe his activities since the 1970s. The majority of Americans, and indeed the majority of independent voters that the Democrats sorely need. You can't simply have higher turnout among young far leftists and expect to win an election. The problem is that that's where Bernie Sanders' support is. The under 40 leftist demographic loves Bernie Sanders. Crowd goes crazy. He goes to New York City. Tens of thousands of people show up. Try getting independent voters to really latch onto your campaign. The fact that he's energizing the left is great. You need to have independent voters. What I believe, and this is another reason why I think he would lose, is that I think you would see independent and leans right turnout skyrocket. I think you would see rates of turnout against Sanders among the center right, people who are like not even passionate conservatives, rival Tea Party levels. I think you would see the greatest kickback against a candidate in modern political history, certainly within U.S. political history, possibly since the Lincoln era. You would see huge blowback against the Democrats embracing a candidate who by and large won't have a mandate even within his own party. As you see, here's the problem. A third of Dems support Biden. I can't imagine a single one of these people latching on to Sanders. Because, I mean, they're both white, male, older, so that's all similar. It's about ideology. Obviously, if they were pragmatic, if it were about just electability in the general sense and it weren't in anything to do with ideology or something, then they would have no problem with Sanders. Instead, they stubbornly resist him. Even when Joe Biden does and says crazy things that disqualify him from possibly winning. I agree with the Bernie bros on that one. I think that Bernie Sanders would be uniquely doomed. I don't think that he would be able to do it. And by the way, for the turnout that you would generate, as you definitely would, among further left, among younger voters, you would lose fervor, I think, among the center left. I think they would, I mean, they're not going to vote for Trump, but I think a lot of them would stay home. Some of the union Dems don't like him anymore because he told them, hey, I'm going to take away, by the way, your union health care coverage. Fuck off. Anyone whose taxes would go up, and this would be scrutinized more if he were in the general election as opposed to being candidate Sanders, I think that would be a problem. Bernie Sanders, I just don't think is going to do it. His time to run would have been back in the early 2000s, arguably. Back then, when leftism hadn't tarnished itself as much as now, he would have just been considered a fruitcake candidate, but he could have maybe done it because he was definitely well-spoken. He was younger-ish, like in his late 60s at the time, which qualifies as young in the Democratic Party today. I just don't think Bernie Sanders can make it. Again, there are a plethora of reasons. It's not just his age. It's not just the health problems. It's not just the fact that he uses the moniker socialism. It's not just the potential turnout differential, the potential demoralization. Also, this would be a huge swing. I don't think he would have the backing of a lot of the DNC insiders. I think that they would largely stand back and say, well, you know, Trump is at least continuing some of the same policies of prior eras, which, by the way, can be problematic in and of itself. We're just going to sit it out. And he wouldn't. By the way, running a grassroots campaign of small donations is great. Trump is doing that too, and he's also a billionaire, whereas Bernie Sanders is not. Bernie Sanders himself is only on the margins of being rich. Who can write themselves a check for $50 million, and who has to rely upon grandma to fund their campaign? Bernie, I mean, can you imagine? Imagine this. Imagine that you have a Sanders-Trump matchup, and neither of them is really interested in whining and dining corporate money. Trump gets some of it through PACs, and by and large, it's funny because there was an article, I think the other day, about how Trump's campaign was actually now competing with his own PAC supporters for the same donations fundamentally. Can you imagine if there was no candidate for the big money to actually, legitimately spend their money on? You could see Bloomberg pull an independent candidacy. By the way, I think there'd be pretty good odds of something like that happening. Or these people would take over the Libertarians. Like, instead of having Bill Weld as their plant in there to give corporate money to and change Gary Johnson's policies to be more corporatist, which they were, they'd probably just take over the LP entirely and run a third-party platform, which would destroy the LP, but it'd be interesting to see. Now, I think that Trump would destroy Bernie Sanders. I think completely annihilate him by margins even larger than he would annihilate Biden. And I think Trump is very likely to win in 2020 because of this. Because all three of the technically viable front-running candidates I see as unelectable. The Democrats are in la-la land and believe that these people can actually win an election. That's the other part is that more and more they're understanding that that's not true. They're seeing through all of that bullshit. The fake bravado, the fake optimism, and it really is. It's at the end of the day, it's fake. That's about all. Peace out.